He woke to the steady beeping of the monitor. The sharp sting of antiseptic heavy in the air. Pain shot through every fiber of his body. But what made him tremble wasn't the wound. It was the memory of standing at death's edge. The blinding glare of a streetlight. The screech of brakes tearing through the night. And the feeling of everything fading. In a single breath. For the first time, he saw just how fragile life truly was. And realized how much he had let slip by. The dull ache radiated from his chest through every limb. A cruel reminder that he was still here. Suspended on the thin line between life and death. In those first days at the hospital, he couldn't tell how much he had slept or stayed awake. All he knew was that every time his eyes opened, the first thing he saw was the cold, white ceiling. And strangers' silhouettes hurrying past the door. Before the accident, his life had been an endless grind. He threw himself into work. As if running from something. Meals gulped down in minutes. Half-finished conversations with family. Cancelled plans with friends. Money, contracts, schedules. All of it had seemed so important. Until the screech of brakes that night ripped it all apart. He remembered lying motionless on the pavement. The chill of the asphalt seeping into his skin. His vision dimming. Yet still trying to catch a glimpse of that heavy, dark sky. No noise. No deadlines. Just an immense, hollow silence surrounding him. In that moment, a primal fear surged within. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of never having truly lived. The hospital became a parallel world, where time slowed to an almost painful crawl. He saw other patients being discharged, heard muffled sobs when bad news came, and noticed the fragile smiles when someone began to recover. Every day, it became clearer. The line between staying and leaving was as thin as a single thread. And that's when the emptiness inside him began to spread. Not the emptiness of losing possessions, but the hollowness of realizing he had missed too many moments worth living. The accident hadn't just broken his body. It had stripped bare the values he once believed in without question. That was when he understood. Something deep within him was gone. And it would never come back the way it was. The first days of recovery were heavy and painfully slow. His body felt like a broken machine. Each small movement paid for with sharp bursts of pain. But the physical strain was nothing compared to the restless weight in his mind. He was forced to live slowly. No longer able to bury himself in work as a form of escape. And that meant facing himself. Something he hadn't done in years. Each morning, as sunlight slipped through the crack in the door, he thought of all the days he'd rushed through life. He realized he had never really looked into his mother's eyes as she sent him off to work. Never fully listened to a friend's story, because he was too busy replying to an email. Never allowed himself to be truly still for even 5 minutes. Those memories came flooding back. Warm yet aching. Like blades twisting deep into the hollow space inside him. As his health improved, he began stepping outside the hospital. At first, his steps trembled along the hallway. Then came physical therapy sessions. And eventually short walks around the courtyard. There, he met an elderly man, steadily practicing his steps despite weak legs. And a young woman who smiled brightly, even while carrying a terminal illness. They didn't say much, but in their eyes was something he had never seen in his own. A quiet peace. He began searching for answers. He read books on meditation, listened to stories from people who had survived the edge of death, and scribbled down his own scattered thoughts. At first, they felt like fragments with no clear shape. But slowly, he realized he was walking a new path. A journey to rediscover the meaning of life. No longer running or filling the silence with work, He allowed himself to slow down. And in that stillness, he began to see each breath, each ray of light, each fleeting moment. Small things that somehow moved him more deeply than any success he had ever achieved. One crisp autumn morning, he decided to walk a little farther, beyond the familiar paths around the hospital. The first light of day stretched across the sidewalk, the air cool and clean, so pure that each deep breath felt as if it was washing every cell inside him. Passing a small park, he spotted a group of children flying kites. Their laughter rang bright and clear. Bare feet dusted with sand, eyes lifted to the colorful kites, painting the deep blue sky. He stopped for a long while, as if something invisible held him there. A boy dashed past, his kite tilting, then soaring high. The string pulled taut, yet his face was light and unburdened, as if nothing on earth could hold him down. In that moment, the truth he had been searching for, but never quite touched, became clear. Peace wasn't about having everything. It was about being free enough to let it all fly. The memory of the accident surged back, but this time, it came without fear. Instead, there was a quiet understanding. Death could arrive at any moment, but that didn't make life any less beautiful. If anything, it made each moment infinitely more precious. He realized he had spent so many years living as though waiting for the right day to be happy, never knowing that today was all he truly had. That day, he sat on a park bench, watching the leaves fall, the hum of distant traffic, the sound of birds warming in the sun, the gentle breeze threading through his hair. Together, they formed a soft, warm, and unspoiled melody. He smiled, for the first time in months, not out of politeness, but from a genuine calm rising from within. His journey was no longer just about healing his body or piecing together the fragments of his life. It had become a journey of finding himself, and he knew he had just stepped through the threshold of awakening. After that morning in the park, he decided it was time to go home. Not to return as someone who had just escaped death, but as a new man, lighter, slower, and certain of where he was headed. The small apartment still carried the faint scent of damp wood and the hum of traffic from the familiar street below. But this time, he didn't rush to check his email or pile up new plans. He threw the windows wide open, letting the wind pour in, bringing with it street vendors' calls and the rustle of leaves. Every sound, every scent made him feel he was here, truly here. On his first day back at the office, his colleagues were surprised to see him walking at an unhurried pace, listening fully to each person's story. No more distracted nods, no more eyes glued to his phone. He began to reorder his life, taking only the projects that fit, spending lunch breaks calling his mother, and keeping evenings for friends or for himself. He also returned to the things he once left behind. One afternoon, he found the old cafe where he and his best friend used to meet every month. When he stepped inside, their laughter echoed, as if no time had passed at all. He realized that the most important things had never been far. He had just been moving too fast to reach them. Even the smallest habits changed. He learned to sip his coffee slowly, read without checking the clock, and let the morning drift by, without trying to make the most of every minute. He knew this homecoming wasn't simply returning to a place, but bringing a new way of seeing into the same space. And when night fell, as he looked at the city lights flickering awake, he understood. He hadn't just escaped death. He had truly returned to life. A life fuller, clearer, and more peaceful than ever before. In the months after his return, life no longer revolved around relentless goals or crowded to-do lists. Instead, he chose to live each day as if it were a gift. Every morning, he still flung the windows wide open, took a deep breath, let the chill seep into his lungs, and smiled at the thought, "Today, I'm still here." He began spending time on things he once considered luxuries. On weekends, he joined a volunteer group, delivering meals to the homeless. He listened to their stories of loss, but with small sparks of hope flickering within. He realized that giving away a little time and a little strength returned to him a different kind of fullness, one that could never be measured in money. His friends said he had changed. He was no longer the man who rushed past without a greeting or disappeared into the world of work. Now, he sparked deep conversations, asked with genuine interest, and stayed to truly listen. He also began writing his own story again, not to complain, but to remind himself, and hopefully someone reading, to pause before it's too late. Some nights, when the city had fallen silent, he sat by the window, gazing toward the glittering lights in the distance. He would recall the moment. He lay motionless on the pavement, the cold cutting through his skin, and the realization that everything could end in a single second. That memory no longer made him tremble. It had become a small guiding light, reminding him of how precious life truly is. He didn't know how much time he had left, but he knew one thing for certain. Every remaining day would be lived fully, not to escape death, but to never again miss life. The life he had found at the very edge of nothingness. One late afternoon at year's end, he stood on the bridge spanning a small river, watching the shimmering water reflect the glow of the setting sun. A light breeze carried the faint scent of cooking fires from distant homes. He closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him completely. Without regret, without hurry, he realized that peace doesn't come from avoiding all pain, but from accepting that pain is simply part of life. The accident that year had nearly taken everything, but it had also returned to him a new way of seeing the world, and a heart grateful for every single beat. If someone is reading these words, he wants to say this: don't wait for a crisis to start living. Call that friend you haven't spoken to in years. Look up at today's sky and tell yourself thank you for still being here. Because life is more fragile than we think, but also more beautiful than we ever believed.